Hello everyone, my name is Keith, and in this video we're taking a look at my top 5 drone photography tips and tricks. I've been redesigning the Aerial Guide website and courses lately. This has given me a chance to consume more content from the community members than usual. The photos, videos, and questions have all been great. Our community ranges from beginners who have just taken their drones out of the box to advanced pilots who have been flying commercially for years, and everyone in between. While I've been consuming more content made from the community, I've been seeing a pattern of common mistakes that are very easy to make. Photography and videography are complicated topics, and adding the ability to fly makes things even more complicated. You can find yourself making these mistakes regardless of skill level, and I still find myself making these mistakes from time to time and have to correct myself when I'm out shooting. You can apply these drone tips and tricks to regular photography and videography as well. But for some reason, it's very common to be shooting with a drone and making these mistakes in particular. So let's get into my top 5 tips and tricks to improve your drone photography. A very common mistake when you're out shooting with a drone is uninteresting compositions in your shots. My first drone photography tip is to always think about composition. Consider what your subject is before you start shooting and have a rough idea of how you're going to present this subject to your viewer. A very common shot is to have your subject in the middle of the frame and just fly closer, or have a top-down shot of your subject and just fly closer to your subject. These are great starting points while you're shooting, but also consider how to make your subject stand out more in the frame. Can you use something to create leading lines that directs your eye towards the subject? Or are there too many distracting objects in the frame where it's hard to pick out your subject at all? Is it possible to shoot from a different angle to maybe eliminate some distracting elements? Creating interesting compositions could be its own course, but for the sake of this drone tips and tricks video, just remember when you're out shooting, composition can make or break your photography and cinematography with your drone, or any camera for that reason. The next drone photography tip piggybacks off of the previous tip, and you need to consider your foreground, middle ground, and background of your picture plane. Not all shots will have all three, and some may just have a foreground that fills the entire frame. But it's important to know how to create depth in your shots and create a sense of layered movement. Of course, with a drone, the camera can move, but the scene starts to show movement when you have a foreground and middle ground and background that all are moving at different rates. If you have a flat composition and you're flying straight, sometimes it doesn't look like the camera's moving at all, especially if you're really high up in the air. When you have a foreground and a background, moving the camera can create a sense of depth. And a trick to make that depth even more dramatic is to have something between the foreground and the background, in the middle ground. You can make things even more dramatic by flying really close to your foreground object. Objects in your foreground are going to move very quickly past the camera, and the middle ground will move slightly, and often the background will appear like it's not moving at all. And this is kind of nice because it provides a visual anchor for everything in your scene. But the foreground and middle ground can still move and be very dynamic. If you're shooting something like a house or a building, I typically try not to add too many layers to the picture plane, and it can actually be distracting in some situations. My next tip is more for video, but it's also true for photography as well. A big drone cinematography tip is to always fly with manual camera settings. This seems pretty obvious, but I see many new drone pilots making the mistake of flying with auto camera settings because they don't know how to properly set the camera themselves. There is a learning curve when it comes to figuring out how cameras work, but the good news is once you know the principles, they carry over to all cameras. Shutter speed is always going to do the same thing. There are different kinds of shutters, they might do it in different ways, but slower shutter speeds will always let in more light, but your objects will be blurry if they're moving quickly. Faster shutter speeds can freeze action in the frame, but let in less light. There are trade-offs at every part of setting up a camera, and deep diving into exposure is really a course on its own. But the main takeaway is to not let the camera decide your settings. If you do this, your results will usually be pretty poor. For the best possible results, get familiar with manually setting your camera and unlock the true potential of your drone. If a clip was shot with bad camera settings, there is no way you can fix it in post-production. Some picture profiles require you to edit your footage in post, and choosing the right photo format can unlock considerably more options for editing. The next tip is to shoot all photos in RAW, and when it comes to video, choose the proper picture profile, because once the shot is taken, you cannot go back and change these settings. When it comes to photography, shooting in RAW format will allow you to adjust the color temperature, highlights, and shadows much more than using something like a compressed JPEG. RAW files have all the data baked into the file, and the file size reflects that. You'll need to have a larger memory card and slightly more computer horsepower to edit these photos, but if you're shooting a photo and want to have the most flexibility when it comes to editing, definitely shoot in RAW. When it comes to shooting video, choosing the right picture profile will determine the look of your shot. If you don't want to color grade your footage at all and you like the look of natural footage, choosing a normal or none picture profile usually gives you pretty good accurate results straight out of the camera. If you want to adjust your shadows and highlights or push your footage farther in post-production, you can do that with a flat log profile, and it's going to allow you to really adjust the colors, highlights, and shadows of your image a lot more, but right out of the camera, it will look muddy and dull. Don't be fooled though, the details are still there and you can enhance them in post-production. This will vary based on your camera or profile you're using, so be sure to research these before you do anything, especially for a client, and know what picture profiles you want to use for your desired look of your footage. My last drone photography tip is directed less towards the camera or principles themselves and more towards something you can't control. And that's going to be a cause of frustration, particularly for drones. That is to know the right weather conditions to shoot. Knowing the subject you want to shoot, in what way and with what settings, can be tricky enough on its own, but if the weather isn't cooperating, it's best to just save the shoot for another time if you can. Bad weather can make the best subjects look bland and boring, and in a studio it's easy to control the light. But when you're flying with the drone outside, you are at the mercy of nature providing the lighting, the weather conditions, the speeds, all of that. If you line up a great shot but it's too windy, the drone will be bobbing all over the place when you go to play your footage back. This is obviously dependent on your drone. Some drones can handle wind better than others, but there is a point when it's just too windy to film and get perfect straight lines with your drone. Depending on what kind of lighting you're going for, you'll have to pay attention to the time of day you're shooting. The obvious example is shooting golden hour for those nice diffused lights and long shadows for showing depth. It's more flattering to shoot at golden hour than it is to shoot in the middle of the day when the sun is directly at the top of the sky. There will be no shadows, but that being said, sometimes you want to shoot at noon. Maybe for real estate photography, there is a home that's surrounded by tall trees, and the only time that a light is hitting part of a home that a realtor wants to show is noon. So the footage might not be the greatest from an artistic or creative standpoint, but certain situations you have to determine what the sun is doing to get the proper amount of light on whatever you're shooting. Knowing the weather conditions and where the light is going to be from the sun will make your shoot a lot easier. Even if you're shooting at noon for a home, I still recommend shooting at golden hour, always. Lighting and wind are obvious talking points when it comes to weather and drones, but there are much more things to take into consideration. Temperature, rain, snow, fog, rapid weather changes. There are all kinds of things to keep in mind while you're flying. Sometimes it can be cool to fly in a little bit of light snow, but if the light snow turns into heavy snow, your drone could be ruined. Keeping an eye on the weather conditions is a big part of ensuring your best flight possible with the best images possible. So those are my top 5 drone photography tips and tricks. These will help you improve your drone photography and will also help you improve your photography in general. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I've been working on the website and courses lately. You can check out the redesign of the website right now. I'll leave a link in the description below. I'm still working on courses. I'm also working on a custom community and downloadable files as well. This is a ton of work, but I've been having a blast creating it. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it, and I'm enjoying consuming your content that you're posting in the Facebook community group. Whenever I'm working, I always have a tab open playing something in the background while I'm working. So it's nice to be able to watch or listen to your content while I'm building this new stuff too. So thank you for everyone who has subscribed and joined the Facebook group, checked out the website, and followed on Instagram. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.